Hello everybody, so here's Black Angel again, and I'm here to talk to you about the functions and what they do in every specific position. I'm going to talk specifically about MBTI positions, so the primary, auxiliary, tertiary, and inferior positions in MBTI. I'm not going to go in depth about socionics because that's a little bit more complicated, and I think it's a second step. So I'd rather not really talk about that. I did that already in the past, and it's really long, messy, and difficult to deliver. So I'm going to stick to MBTI since that's what my last videos are actually about. So before I start, I want to apologize for the type of video. I wanted to make one with my webcam, which is a better tool. But I couldn't because my computer is making like years of updates and it's gonna last forever. So I only have this time and I want to dedicate it to this video. So let's start from scratch. The first position or primary position in MBTI. That's what some people consider our identity. Well, I'm not entirely sure that's exactly how things are, but I do partially agree. I mean, the first position is the main modality we use to think. So it's basically our base motivation. So yes, in some way it does represent our identity, even though our identity, our cognitive identity is actually represented by the whole pattern of the four functions so that we're going to talk about. But the first function is what is going to be easier for anyone to identify with because of the characteristics that it represents. I would rather think in terms of values, so groups of values. That's what functions basically are. Functions basically represent groups of values in a system of dichotomies. So if you think of extroverted sensing, for example, we're going to talk about willpower, we're going to talk about action, movement. If we think specifically about action, on the other side of the coin, we have introverted sensing, which is instead relaxation. It's focusing on internal states, whereas action focuses on external states. So that's the dichotomy, internal versus external. Or the other sense in which you can look at it is how I leave the thing versus how the thing is from an objective point of view. So that's basically not only for extroverted, introverted sensing, but it's also for every other function. So it's groups of values based on a dichotomy. And then the first function, the primary function in MBTI represents our main focus. So basically the core of our identity on which everything else is built. So I want to introduce here a little concept that we have in neuroscience and developmental psychology. And this little concept is about pruning, basically. And I'm not talking botanic, I'm talking the brain pruning. The brain works this way. It starts from a single cell and it develops, basically. The single cell is what develops into the embryo. So we have the brain growing from the moment from when the child starts to be one, to adulthood and up until death. So in this development of the brain, there are stages, and these stages are influenced by the experiences and by our choices. So, for example, a child that is going to focus on music because he discovers or she discovers a musical talent, for example, are going to develop those areas that are revolving around musicality. So, for example, the ability to move the fingers if they're playing the piano, or everything that is connected to movement and to thinking in that kind of pattern. Accompanied to this, there's also the so-called pruning, which is when the brain cuts out those things that are considered useless, those parts of the brain, those neurons that are considered branches, or rather, that are considered useless for the person's activity and for the person's life. So if we focus specifically on in one direction, we're going to cut our abilities in another direction. So, for example, someone that is a nerd is going to focus on whatever field it is they're interested in, and they're going to be very closed and very concentrated into studying that kind of thing. And they're not going to go outside a lot, and they're not going to be in touch with people a lot. And that is what their brain is going to consider not that useful and to cut. So they're never going to be able to develop high social skills because they chose another path. So we become what we want to be, and we mold ourselves during our life path. So why am I telling you this? Because it is very important that you understand that whatever it is that your first function is, you're going to identify with that because it's the main thing that you chose to do in your life. So the most important thing to you is going to be your first function. Whatever represents your main focus is going to locate in the first function. So extroverted sensing dominants are going to be the most active types that you find out there. Extroverted feeling dominants are going to be the most sociable types that you find out there. And so on and so forth. TE dominants are going to be the most knowledgeable types that you find out there. And every function in the first position is exponentialized for this reason, because the person focused specifically on that area. But we need other tools to be able to access to a specific area, and we're never going to develop one single area. And that's where our auxiliary function is coming into help to our dominant function. So the auxiliary function is the function that we develop second, and that is a little bit less developed than the first function, than the dominant function, but still very important in the formation of our identity. And why is it so important? Because it basically provides some sort of blend of the first function. So the focus on which we revolve the first function is going to be our auxiliary function. For example, the clearest example that I can give to you is the split between INTJ and INFJ. An INFJ is going to focus on people. So their understanding of patterns, their understanding of processes over time, their understanding of cause and effect is going to be connected specifically to individuals. Whereas for an INTJ, the INTJ is going to focus their understanding of patterns, their ability to see patterns, and their ability to see past and future, their ability to see processes to knowledge. So whatever it is that is inside the area of knowledge, they're going to be able to elaborate with their introverted intuition. So basically, in some way, some things that an INFJ can do with extroverted feeling, also an INTJ can be able to do. For example, an INFJ can take a person's emotions and explain or define how those emotions are going to evolve in the future. Whereas an INTJ can take the person's behavior and see how the person's behavior is going to evolve in the future. So, because that's part of the area of knowledge, and actions are facts. So the behavior of a person is a fact, and TE, we know, that deals with facts. Yes, I'm perfectly aware that there are philosophies out there that attribute facts to other functions, but I completely disagree with those theories because they're not based on a dichotomic way of thinking, and they do not apply to the reality out there. Whereas this way of thinking applies to the reality out there, and you can see it actually happening in people. So that's why I choose this kind of definition of functions. So the auxiliary function basically is the blend attributed to our first function, but it's not the only thing that it does. It's called the creative function. It's the area where we express our creativity. So whatever it is that we have as an auxiliary function is going to be what we use when we need to express our creativity. What example can I make? Introverted sensing auxiliaries tend to be cooks, or anyway have a lot of fun cooking, because that's where they can become creative with taste and how they feel taste and how taste dances in their mouth and how it mixes with other flavors. And that's the area, that's when an ESTJ or an ESFJ can actually become creative with their introverted sensing. Cooking is something that they enjoy a lot for this reason. That's just an example. It's not just a matter of the activities that we actually choose. It's also a matter of the things that we actually enjoy doing. A lot of TE auxiliaries, for example, enjoy mounting and building closets or house furniture. For example, IKEA is the night dream and the daydream of a TE creative. That's just to give a couple of examples. That's what we enjoy the most doing, because it's actually fun for us to operate in that realm. So the core of our identity would be built by our dominant function that provides our main focus with the auxiliary function that that helps the first function find an area of application. That's how I would call it. If we take the example of INTJs, they use their ability to see patterns to use it in research fields or in knowledge in any way, in any area of knowledge. Same thing for INFJs. They take their ability to see patterns and they apply it to the emotional states of people. So they become experts in the area of the emotional states of people. So that's the dominant and the auxiliary function. And now I think you start seeing why making the whole 8 positions thing would be extremely complicated and too long. The tertiary function instead, so to continue our path, the tertiary function is extremely important because it actually represents our area of self-esteem. MBTI doesn't actually speak a lot about this function because Myers and Briggs did not go in depth about the actual definition of each position. But it is actually true that the tertiary function represents the area of our self-esteem. So, for example, for an introverted sensing tertiary, it's going to be important to learn to handle their body, to handle their sensory experience with their body, to get in touch with their body. So these people are people that normally try to prove their physical strength. They try to make sure that their body's working. They take a lot of care of their physical state. When they fall sick, they actually lose self-esteem because they think that they've done something to get that illness onto them, or they didn't do what it took to actually prevent the illness. So the tertiary position, is actually what matters the most in matters of self-esteem. So to be in balance with ourselves. We actually take that thing more like a game than like a serious thing. So whenever we toy with the tertiary function, we're actually kind of playing like children to learn something new, to handle this, to do it the best way possible. We do not spend all the time thinking about our tertiary function, but it is a very important one because whenever we're struck by lack of self-esteem, it's because something happened revolving around that tertiary function. That's normally when we start focusing on it and we start trying to fix it. And another reason why it is very important is that in every path of personal growth, the main focus actually goes to the development of the tertiary function and a little bit to the development of the last function, the inferior function. But the main focus is on the development of the tertiary function, or actually gaining self-confidence. That's the biggest problem that we all have. Even those that actually have a lot of self-confidence can benefit from this work on the tertiary function. Last function, so that we finish our excursion into the realm of functions, is going to be the inferior function. The inferior function is also defined the area of expertise of other people. So that's the area where we start asking others. So whenever we have a need that comes from the abuse of our dominant function, that's what we do. That's normal. I'm talking about abuse, but in a positive sense. So while we abuse our dominant function and spend so much time revolving around that thing, we lack the inferior function. And we go around asking people and begging people and bugging people about this inferior function, about help about this inferior function. What I noticed about people is that whenever we as individuals define someone useless for us or not helpful, that's when this person cannot provide in any possible way that inferior function. For example, TI inferiors are people that go in search of general rules of behavior or general rules that can lead them through life. And whenever they do not get the kind of answer, they start getting angry to the person. They're not the only ones that do that. That's actually something that we all do. So an INTJ or an INFJ, exterior sensing inferior, they're seeking action. So whenever they see someone that is inactive, they're going to get angry to the person because they feel mocked, they feel dragged down, they feel like this person is trying to destroy them in some way because they need that action. Same applies to TI inferiors, same applies to SI inferiors. They need someone to take care of them physically, to help them with the realm of physical sensation. So whenever someone doesn't respond to that kind of need, they're going to go insane and get angry to the person because it's like this person is trying to physically kill them. So that's how important the inferior function is in dealing with others. So that's the function that actually constitutes our primary focus in finding a mate, in finding someone that makes us happy. Whenever we think we found an answer to that specific question that comes from our inferior function, that's when we choose that person as a partner. It doesn't always mean that it is true that we found the person that can respond to our needs in that sense, but that's the illusion. Whenever we get the illusion that that person can respond to our needs in that sense, then we're going to choose that person as a possible partner. That's why socionics defines this function the dual seeking function, because it's the function that we use to seek support outside, and normally the person that responds the best is going to be what we consider a potential soulmate. It's the person that can understand us the best. So I understand that a lot of what I said is not exactly what you expected and what you are used to see when you read stuff about MBTI in groups and stuff. And that's why it is important to actually be informed about things and to read about things and to go in depth and see how things actually exist in reality. That's why I spend a lot of time doing this kind of work. And I hope that those that watch my videos actually do that kind of work too, like going outside and see if it's actually true that an ESFJ is going to ask TI questions or questions that require a TI answer. If it is true that an ESFP is going to ask questions that require an introvert intuition answer. So patterns of cause and effect. So you don't have to believe me by the word, but the world is out there and you can check by yourself if people actually work this way. I personally did, and I know that it works. I was thinking today that it would be very important to actually spread this theory and to actually make it known to others, because it can help you not only understand others but also understand yourself. One thing that I didn't say, but that is quite important about functions and positions, is that the two functions that provide self-awareness are TI and FI. So those who do not have TI or FI in their dominant or auxiliary function are going to experience some difficulties with self-awareness and with figuring out themselves and figuring out who they are. So ironically, it is easier for an ESTP to know who they are than it is for an INFJ. And that's because the creative focus of this an INFJ is external, on other people. Same happens to an INTJ. An INTJ can have a partial understanding of themselves, but not actually know who they are. And that comes from the fact that extroverted thinking is focused on understanding, knowing things, and seeing things externally. So knowledge, behaviors, patterns outside. So whenever the creative function focuses externally, it becomes difficult to see inside. So ENTJs have a better understanding of themselves than INTJs do. Even though lacking introverted feeling, they also experience a lot of difficulties figuring out themselves. But you can see an ENTJ, for example, claim to be opportunist, but you will never hear an INTJ claim they're skeptic, even if they are. Unless they've done a path of personal growth, because for some reason the auxiliary function seems to influence a lot the perception that we have of ourselves. Plus, introverts have a tendency to be a lot in their heads, and for introverts it's a lot difficult to actually figure out who they are and how they work, because the internal focus blinds them in some way. Some INFPs or some ISFPs also have difficulties with figuring out who they are, because they have a heightened awareness of their emotional environment, of their emotional self, but they lack awareness about the auxiliary function because of this focus internally. Because they focus internally and they see inside better than they do outside. So they know themselves, emotionally speaking. They know what makes them tick. They know what makes them react. They know a lot of things about themselves, but they cannot pick the right type because they lack the global understanding of themselves. Still, TI and FI being the most solipsistic functions. I cannot pronounce that word. I don't know why. But anyway, those two functions seem to be those that are going to be the most helpful in defining identity. Anyway, yeah, I think I will close this here. I made it a little bit long. I wanted to make it shorter, but anyway, I will talk to you soon. Bye.